Spread the fire, break the chains, feed the mind. Welcome to another episode of SMWX, a guest episode with Mighty Jamie. So, today we're having a conversation about the president's speech, his vision for South Africa going forward, coalitions, and some of the drama that is unfolding, and then the issue of race discourse in South Africa, with specific focus on the Member of Parliament from the Democratic Alliance who has been suspended. So let's get into the president's speech and reflections on the president's speech. So the president spoke about a lot of things, how we have a duty to unite, how we need to create a growing and inclusive society, how we need to have democratic renewal, and how we need to have social and economic transformation. Overall, his speech struck the right tone. It was a good speech from President Ramaphosa, and he is capable of giving that kind of a performance. He was humble. He did acknowledge that the ANC failed in many respects to convince voters to give them the full mandate. He did acknowledge that this meant that they would have to govern in a coalition. He did acknowledge that there were many failings of the government. All of these things were good. He also acknowledged that there are deep divisions and polarizations in South Africa. Polarizations and divisions which have persisted and continue to persist on the basis of class, on the basis of gender, on the basis of race. All of these things are true. And then he spoke about how there needs to be courage, a common mission, and how we need to move forward to fix all of the problems that he identified. Problems such as quality of education, crime, corruption. These are all the right things to say at a high level. The challenge that remains going forward is that the details need to be clarified very quickly. And the details are areas of contestation between coalition partners and the ANC. For example, the Democratic Alliance wants to reduce the budget deficit. They want to make sure that the public sector is smaller. Those types of things, those types of interventions do not allow government to actually spend more on interventions such as infrastructure building, interventions such as increasing the number of nurses, increasing the number of doctors, increasing the number of students who can access university. The Democratic Alliance believes in giving bank-based student loans as opposed to what currently happens with NSFAS. And that creates the kind of challenges that we've seen in the United States of America, where people don't actually access the middle class, even though they are earning middle class income, because they have to pay back these prohibitive student loans because of the type of debt that they took on while they were in university. The student loan problem is a big problem in America as things exist right now. So, a lot of good intentions from President Ramaphosa, lots of good intentions. The other challenge is really going to be, are his coalition partners going to be stable and ready to come to the party? Because we've already started seeing some challenges with the coalitions. But before we move on, he also did have some very, very somber and even tough talk, because he spoke about those who seek to divide, to distract, to sow doubt, those who seek to inflate and inflame tensions, and spoke about how they will not succeed. And my reading of that, and I think also your reading of that, was that he was talking about the MK party. So even though his speech was humble, even though it was hopeful, it was also tough in respect to speaking about those particular parties. So if you think about it, this speech would have landed very differently in KwaZulu-Natal than how it landed in Pretoria. In Pretoria, people were very excited to listen to this speech. We were in the crowd as SMWX, and we saw that the audience there was very hopeful and supportive of President Ramaphosa. But this was not a usual State of the Union address, or rather an inauguration acceptance speech, because there were some factors that we just need to be aware of. The absence of Jacob Zuma, the absence of the MK party being one of them, indicating that things are not stable, things are not normal. The other one was that there was a split screen because Julius Malema was actually in court, right, facing charges for the discharge of a firearm at one of the EFF events a few years ago. So this duality shows that while he had a captive audience in the room, there were other places where the audience would not have been as captive or as supportive. One of the things I want to discuss briefly before we move on is this idea of the African Continental Free Trade Area. President Ramaphosa has continued to refer to it as an opportunity for growth, as an opportunity for us to reach another level in terms of African development. However, the implementation and rollout of the free trade area from the time of its what you call launch has really been lethargic at best. And I'm being very, very generous here. There hasn't really been a lot of progress in development of the commercialization and capitalization of that African Continental Free Trade Area. So that's just something that we have to be aware of. Finally, he did speak about the just energy transition. He never mentioned the just energy transition directly, though, but he spoke about being ambitious in our energy goals, being ambitious in our climate change goals, and making sure that we do things that are just and inclusive. Whenever you hear just and inclusive being discussed around energy, you must know that it's code for IPPs. Let's be very clear. Not everyone benefits the same way from IPPs. Patrice Motsepe and his company, African Rainbow Minerals and Energy, they benefit a great deal from the IPP contracts because they are part of the ICAMVA consortium, which won 12 out of 25 of the bids in one of the bid windows, right? So 12 out of 25 is a significant amount. And, you know, the proximity of Patrice Motsepe to President Cyril Ramaphosa is one that is not lost on any of us. We saw him at the inauguration. We saw him taking selfies with President Ramaphosa's son. That's a proximity that I think requires some questions to be asked. Because on the one hand, you have a president who's saying we're very committed to just energy transition, passing laws that are favorable to just energy transition, and his brother-in-law happens to run a company that actually is bidding for solar and wind projects and winning those bids. So that synergy, that combination, I think requires ethical scrutiny. Maybe people are not happy to do it now. Maybe they're not ready to do it now. But it's something that we have to be cognizant of. And then we also have to be cognizant of the fact that even though wind and solar are necessary parts of an energy mix, we do have to ask ourselves right now about base load. What do we actually use the most of, and what do we need the most of? It's difficult to industrialize your economy of wind and solar unless you go to nuclear, right? Because nuclear can give you the type of energy needs that you need and actually is also sustainable in a way that coal is not. So these are conversations that we need to have. That wraps up the discussion around the president's speech.
Thanks for watching SMWX. Before we get back to the episode, I just wanted to let you know the 4 ways that you can help support this channel if you want to see us growing bigger and better to keep you more entertained and informed. The first way is you can invite me to speak at your company, your school, your institution. You'll see the contact details down below. The second way is that you can become a member of this channel. Become a member, or you can give us a thanks. You'll see there's like a heart with a $sign in the ribbon below this video. Buy me and the team some coffee for this episode. The third way you can get involved is you can advertise on the channel. Now, I'd much rather the community of viewers would be advertisers on this channel than me going out to people who don't really know about SMWX and trying to explain it to them. So if you're a viewer and you have a business and you want to partner and you love this platform, let's partner on this channel. And then finally, you can buy merchandise, you can buy books. All this is in the description down below. Now let's get back to the episode.
Now, the next big task for the president will be the composition of cabinet. And we're already seeing that there's going to be a fight over this. When the Democratic Alliance entered into the coalition deal, they were expecting to get 7 cabinet positions, 5 to 7. That's the reporting that we saw in Business Day, saw it in News 24, something to that effect. They're also expecting to have a minister in the presidency in John Steenhuisen with the powers of government business. Those powers currently belong to Paul Mashatile and typically have been the powers of the vice president. But it seems as if the markets want to speak to John, they don't want to speak to Paul. Right? So that's something that we have to think about. So as things stand, though, it does seem as if the ANC now is trying to play Powerball with the Democratic Alliance. Why do I say this? And we've seen these disputes happening. We saw Fikile Mbalula having a conversation with Clement Manyatela on SABC, and there was a dispute around, can actually the ANC invite new members into the coalition deal to try to build on their particular base? Helen Zille said no, they can't, and Fikile Mbalula said yes, they can. We've also heard now from the chief whip of the ANC also saying, listen, this is our thing. We can invite whoever you want. If you don't like it, you can go jump. We also heard the ANC Youth League president saying, this is our thing. If you don't like it, you can go jump. But Helen Zille actually did say the clause 24 of this coalition deal requires that the people who signed first must actually be consulted to actually allow for new members to come in. What is the basis of this dispute? The other side of the dispute is this 19.3 clause of that intention agreement that they signed. Clause 19.3 stipulates that if there's a lack of dispute resolution, if there's no consensus, what then happens is that so what does it say? Let me rephrase. It says that in order for anything to be passed where there's some kind of a dispute, you need to have at least sufficient consensus. And that sufficient consensus comes from parties which are signatories to the coalition agreement representing 60% of the seats in the National Assembly. So there's two parts there. You have to be party to the coalition agreement. I'm not calling it a government of national unity on purpose because I don't think it's a government of national unity. And I think we must have factfulness in our discourse. This is different from other governments of national unity, which we saw in Kenya, which we saw in Zimbabwe, which we saw in 1994. This is a government of semi-unity. It's a coalition of semi-unity, selective coalition, as it was called by the leader of the gift of the givers, right? So in any event, you have to be party to the coalition, right? And then it has to be representing 60% of the seats in the National Assembly. That's what 19.3 says. So what does it mean? It means effectively that in order for you to pass sufficient consensus, you need to have the Democratic Alliance and the ANC agreeing, because they are the only parties that are representing 60% of the seats in the National Assembly in that particular GNU. Do you see how it works? Not GNU, coalition. Right? You see how they repeat something so often you end up saying it got mistake. It's a coalition. In any event, we are seeing now that the ANC was like, nah, maybe this is not a good deal. And they're trying to add people to dilute, because the ANC interpretation is that it's 60% of the members of the coalition agreement. And they reckon that if they add, Freedom Front Plus, Patriotic Alliance, what that does is it takes them without the DA over the 60% mark. So what does this necessarily mean? It means that at this stage, we may see the Democratic Alliance not getting all of the things that they wanted in the cabinet. We may even see them walking away from this coalition agreement because they're saying that they don't want to be a junior partner in the coalition. The ANC did not win this election outright, and they need other parties, and they need to recognize that they don't run everything. At a principle level, I think that the Democratic Alliance is correct. Right? The ANC cannot play bully politics with them because they needed them to get the president into his position. The reason why the ANC was so happy to agree to everything on on that Friday was because they wanted to make sure that the president is elected, that the DA votes, and obviously the DA also benefited, but it was a small benefit in the National Assembly in the gaining of the deputy speaker. The real game was for cabinet, and that's what they were understanding. So they delivered their side. They signed. Everyone was happy. The rand was happy. The markets were happy. Now the ANC, in principle, has to meet the Democratic Alliance on the terms of their deal. It doesn't look like they're willing to, though. It looks as if the ANC wants to play hardball here because they are recognizing that, listen, we've got less seats already and we can't give up key ministries, because part of the terms and conditions was that the DA would get senior ministry positions. Now, typically what is senior would be finance, it would be justice, it would be defense, it would be education, it would be healthcare, it would be international relations. These are the very, very senior portfolios. And it doesn't look as if there's a willingness from the ANC to give those away. The minerals, for example, public enterprises, some of those are vacant. Police is vacant. We know that, for example. We know that public enterprise is also vacant because Begitele and Pravin Gordhan are not coming back. But it doesn't look as if they're willing to give those particular seats away or to even make compromises. It seems to me, when I was listening to the chief whip of the ANC, that their reasoning is, even if the DA were to via right now, Hamba when at DA, they've already got the presidency. It's locked in. They've already got the speaker. It's locked in. They've already got the speaker of the Council of Provinces. Everything that they've wanted is already locked in. Now, even if the DA goes back and becomes the official opposition and walks out of this deal, one, they will maintain the presidency. To remove the presidency, you need to do that through a motion of no confidence or an impeachment. But just because you walk away from the deal doesn't mean that the president loses his job. He keeps his job. With or without the coalition, he keeps his job. And then what he then needs is to make sure he's got a supply of votes that are going to give him enough to get over the mark for any legislation that he needs to pass. But in terms of his job, appointing his executive, in terms of like fulfilling his executive agenda, he can do that now without the DA. Even if he gives them one ministry, as far as he's concerned, he doesn't have to give them anything, right? They've already won. And it looks like this is the game that they want to play, where they say, DA, we can do this without you. And maybe this is why they're also being confrontational, because they're like, we can do this without you. The other side of the equation is that they've already invited other people, such as the Freedom Front Plus. So the DA is considered to be a white majority party in terms of its leadership. So is the Freedom Front Plus. If you go to the public and you tell them, we have a government of national unity, right? Then one of the partners walks away, and that partnership represents a large group of white people. If you can bring in another group of white people and say, hey, no, this is still a united thing. We don't have the DA, they're arrogant, they were trying to bully us. We still have the Freedom Front Plus, and we're happy to govern with them. To some people, that may be sufficient, and it may be considered still to be this diverse coalition which represents both racial groups, etc. The question is, will the markets buy it? The markets really wanted to have the Democratic Alliance in there. We saw the kind of donations that were going to the Democratic Alliance from Michel Leroux, the founder of Capitec, through his fine boss donor institutions there. We saw the Oppenheimers themselves funding the Democratic Alliance and the IFP. And we saw that there's a desire. That's what they were saying, that there's a desire in one of the polls for people to see this kind of a coalition deal. So it's unclear to me whether, what is it called? Stiffing the Democratic Alliance will be something that is well received by the markets, particularly because they view the Democratic Alliance as being better with finances than the ANC, and they want to necessarily see them in there. But this is where things stand right now. We also heard Gayton McKenzie saying all manner of things about Helen Zille. So it's unclear to me whether this coalition will survive and what kind of combinations we will then end up getting in the cabinet. What do you think, though? Do you think that we're going to see a lot more people from the smaller parties or the new parties. I prefer new parties as opposed to small parties because small is condescending. Every party starts somewhere. Even the DA at some point was not a big party, but now they are bigger. So are we going to see some cabinet positions for those, new parties, or are we going to see the cabinet positions going to the Democratic Alliance and, it's actually entering into the presidency in that capacity? Is John Steenhuisen going to share powers with Paul Mashatile? Is he even going to become vice president? All of these things are still up there. All of these things are still up there, but it looks like there's trouble in that GNU paradise, as they call it, the coalition that they've signed. Now, let's talk about Renaldo Gouws, right? As you may be aware right now, the Democratic Alliance has suspended its member, Renaldo Gouws, for the comments that he made. And what they said is that, well, the last video that we saw, oh no, that was really bad because he used certain words. He used the N word and he used the K word, and well, we saw it in video. Therefore, now we are sure that no, this guy is off the mark. I just want to say this is a very simplistic understanding of racism from the Democratic Alliance. Racism doesn't just occur when someone uses particular words. Racism can occur even when someone doesn't use those words. And in fact, some of the most dangerous racists are people who avoid using those words. People will say, you guys don't know how to run a country. You guys have a tendency of failing to run a country. And when they say that, they are still making racial stereotypical arguments. Why hasn't Africa built anything? Those types of arguments really are rooted in a premise that says you as a group, as Black people, cannot create, cannot build. So for me, the idea that his other comments were in a gray area was one that was strange to me. Because if someone were to say that if Africa disappeared from the face of the earth, no one would even notice, it's factually untrue, but it implies that Africa is useless. Africans are useless. That's the implication. It's not so hidden that it needs us to say, oh, well, where's the racism? Where's the racism? The racism is patently clear even in those statements. So this idea that they needed to hear on video a K word or an N word in order for them to say, oh, yeah, now that's really racism. That was really peculiar to me. And I think it was very illogical. One of the things I do want to say, though, around the Democratic Alliance is that they need to really reflect on what this moment represents. This gentleman is part of the far right community, and the far right community, in many instances, does practice racism as well as xenophobia. They practice those things. They also sometimes practice misogyny and homophobia. Kuhlangene laphayana ku-far right, yonke into is there. You'll find everything there in the far right. And they have a cohort of people in their organization who come from this school of thought. And I think they thought it was attractive to get these people to return their voters who went to the Freedom Front Plus. And perhaps this is why they chose to entertain people like this. But they really have to reflect, because many people have pointed out that DA leaders were going onto this gentleman's platform, making content with this gentleman, fully aware of his ideology, his rhetoric. And believe me, if he said this on video, you can imagine what else he said. He seems to be very obsessed with this idea of a reverse racism happening in South Africa, even though when you look at the statistics, the unemployment rate in the white community is 9%. The unemployment rate in the Black community is over 50% on the expanded definition. That's from the data which comes from Stats SA. But his whole shtick was going around saying that, white people are not getting jobs anymore, white people are being discriminated against, and even making this argument that there is a massive farm murder problem in South Africa. There are murders on farms that occur, but there's no systemic murder of white South Africans in farms. And in fact, in the last year that was reported, under 50 people were killed on farms in particular. But over 5,000 people were murdered in the Western Cape. If you do the numbers, you will see that the murder problem that exists in South Africa is one that affects the townships, it affects the high density areas. It's not one that is a farm specific thing. And even on those farms, from that 50, some of the murders that occurred there were family members killing each other, it was spouses killing each other, and also it was farm workers who were being killed, not particularly people of a particular race. Most of those murders occurred in the context of what we would typically consider to be house robberies, and none of it has been indicated or proven to be politically motivated. And that's something that we have to be aware of. But these are the types of rhetoric that he was entertaining and pushing and advancing. And the DA entertained some of these talking points for a long period of time. So there's a need for them to reflect, because they are making it seem as if they only found out about this now that those particular pieces of content were raised on the internet and the petition went out. However, they have known, and they need to then think, because when the president was speaking about deepening divisions, deepening polarities, some of this comes from that. There are some people who are willing to deny the fact that South Africa is still deeply divided. South Africa is still deeply divided, and many people are still carrying the wounds and trauma from the racial what can we call it, oppression and subjugation of the apartheid era. And it's not over. And it's not sufficient for you to go to people and say to them, just forget about it, just move on. When I say it's not over, I'm referring specifically to systemic oppression, which continues. But also sometimes there is interpersonal racism, which continues. Sometimes you get shouted at just unprovoked by people across the racial line, and you're like, what the hell is going on? Sometimes people can even call you at night and harass you on the basis of race. Those things still happen. So it then becomes insincere to say to people, get over it, when they're still experiencing racism, right? It's like what Kanye West said, racism's still alive, they just be concealing it, right? Not an endorsement of Kanye West and his weird ways. I'm just saying that there's still an issue, and it's not sufficient for you to tell people to move on, to get over it. That's it's a dishonest assessment of the moment. If we are going to actually achieve a better racial cohesion and harmony, that requires us to have honest conversations. And you can't actually have honest conversations while a part of your political base is entertaining all of these toxic ideologies and ideas, and has people prominent in the organization making weekly YouTubes and daily TikToks advancing those problematic ideas. So DA, you have to reflect, and you also don't shy at the people, because this is not the first person who has said problematic things, who went to a disciplinary hearing and then chigi they were back. Helen Zille said she loved colonialism. She went to a disciplinary hearing and now she's the leader of the party again. So people are watching and they understand and they've seen some of this happen before. So I hope you're not trying to think that people will just forget and move on. I think that you have to really show that you are committed to the values of the Constitution as much as you said you are. Right, guys, we're out of time, but I wonder, what do you think about the president's speech? What do you think about the cabinet coalitions? What do you think about this massive scandal that has happened with Renaldo Gouws? And do you think that the right remedy is for him to be expelled from the DA and then expelled effectively from parliament? Or do you think that he deserves a second chance? Clement Manyatela made an interesting point. He said there's nothing that he has done that indicates rehabilitation. He has not taken anger management courses. He has not taken racial sensitivity courses. He has not paid any damages for any of the things that he has said. He has not restituted anybody. And other people have complained about his anti-HIV comments because his homophobic. There's a lot that happened, and it doesn't seem as if there's been any attempts whatsoever for rehabilitation. Do you think that there should be a rehabilitation process? Because as a politician being kicked out of parliament, basically that's game over for your political career. So we have to think, is it too harsh of a sentence or is it the right amount? Let's have a conversation though. I want to hear what you think. We're going to be in the comments. And I'm very happy to see that the plaque is here. Keep subscribing, guys. If you haven't subscribed, keep subscribing. We need to grow this channel. Let's get to 1 million. McG, we're coming for you, Baba. We're coming for you, McG. Guys, double tap on this thing. Till the next one. Yeah.
Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel, so why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights.